Alright guys, welcome. Today we're going to be going over reflections on the coordinate plane, and we're going to be specifically talking about reflections. So a reflection flips a figure over a line of reflection in order to create a mirror image. Each reflected point of the figure should be the same distance from the line of reflection on the opposite side. So as down here you can see that each of these images have been flipped over the line of reflection, which is the x-axis, is the line of reflection there, to create a mirror image. So it's the same thing, just flipped over and reflected over that line. So on this one is the same deal. It's the same picture, but this time it's reflected over the y-axis. That's going to be your line of reflection. So down here in number 1, it says reflect the figure shown over the y-axis. So you're going to be reflecting your image over the y-axis because that's the one that runs up and down. You guys got to remember that the y is this line right here and the x is this line right here. So reflect the figure shown over the y-axis. Boom. Take this figure and move it over to here. Now how can you know how to do that? You can take W, and you see how W is right here. How many spots is it from the y-axis? It's 1, 2 spots. So when I reflect W, I need to move 1, 2 spots and plot that point right there. And you're going to label that W. Same thing for Y. It is 2 spots from the y-axis. So I can count 1, 2, and label that spot Y. And the same thing for X. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Plot that point there and then use a ruler or any kind of straight edge, maybe the edge of a folder or a cereal box, and just draw a nice straight line there to your points. Now over here, they want you to list the coordinates. So you guys definitely can list the coordinates for W, X, and Y, and you can list the new coordinates for your image on these points right here on W, X, and Y. Alright? Don't forget to add this little apostrophe because that goes to show you where your image is. That's your new image. Okay? On the next part it says describe any patterns found in the ordered pairs. So what happened to the X values when you reflected it over the y-axis? And what happened to your Y values when you reflected it over the x-axis? Well, I'm going to give you a little hint. In your pre-image, you have coordinates of 2 and 6. So X is 2 and Y is 6. When I reflected W over the y-axis, I got brand new coordinates. And these coordinates are -2 and 6. So, what happened to the X values here? Well, don't forget how to tell which one are your X values, right? In your ordered pairs, X comes first and Y comes second. So they want to know what happened in that first number in your ordered pairs, which is X. So if you take a look on your first ordered pair, for W you had 2 as your X value, and on the image you had -2. So what happened to those X values? This one was positive and this one became negative for your X values. Now take a look at what happened to the Y values. For W, my Y value was 6, and in my new image my Y value was also 6. So nothing changed when I reflected over the y-axis. So when you reflect an image over the y-axis, your Y values are going to stay the same. But if you're reflecting it over the y-axis, the X values change to the opposite number. So the opposite number of 2 is -2. If you're confused about anything on the top, on this part. You can email me or ask me questions. Number 2 is the same as number 1, right? For number 1, it says, how can we represent this algebraically? So just think about it. When you're reflecting over the y-axis, you can see that y is going to stay the same here. And when you're reflecting it over the x-axis, which is this one that runs right across, your y values will change. So when you're reflecting it over x, x stays the same. When you're reflecting it over y, y stays the same. For number 3 over here, it says reflect triangle PQR over the y-axis. So right here I drew in blue your y-axis. I'm going to take this image and I'm going to move it over here. I'm going to reflect it, but be precise. Make sure you're counting the spots. So for R, there's 1, 2. So you'd have to go 1 and 2. So your point would actually be right about there. All right. So make sure that you're using precise plotting. All right. So once you're done reflecting the image, they want to know what happened to each of the coordinates. So whatever your coordinates are here, they want to know the difference between these coordinates and these coordinates. So the coordinates for R are going to be one thing, right? They're going to have a negative for X and a positive for Y. And when you reflect R over here into the new quadrant, your X is going to be positive and your Y is going to be positive. How is that different? Well, in this one, my X is positive, and in this one, my X is negative. So in this one, my Y is positive, and then my Y is also positive. Why? Because I reflected it over Y. So when I reflect it over Y, my Y coordinate stays positive because I'm reflecting it over Y. So whatever axis you're reflecting it over, that coordinate stays the same. On the other hand, whatever axis you're reflecting it over is going to change. So for example, if I reflected it over Y, Y stays the same, and X changes. After that, they ask you to reflect the figure again. So you're going to reflect it over the X-axis. So just make sure that you're being precise and that you're labeling it PQR. So tell me which points you're reflecting. So you reflected R here. You're going to have R right there. Right? And then again, if you're reflecting it over the x-axis, you're going to have R right there. So make sure that you're labeling your points right, because these show the reflections that take place for R, for your vertice R. So in number 6, it says use the chart to compare and contrast translations and reflections. By the way, we're not going to do number 5. Okay, we're going to cross that one out. So what are the similarities between a translation and a reflection? And if you don't remember anything about translations, just take a look back at yesterday's work and go over what a translation is. Remember, translations, the key word there was slide. Where reflections, it is a mirror image. So try to take that information and write some similarities down between the two. And again, if you don't know something, you can ask Google. You can ask Google, how are translations and reflections the same? Or you could ask Google, how are translations and reflections different? And gain that information for yourself. Number 7 says, use what you learned to show where the following points would be after the given reflections. So, here in my pre-image, we have a coordinate for A is 6 and 8. So, I'm going to reflect it over the x-axis. So because I'm reflecting it over the x-axis, the x value stays the same. Reflection over x, x stays the same. What happens to your y value? It changes to the opposite. That's when you're reflecting over the x-axis. Now if I was going to take A in the coordinates 6 and 8 and reflect it over the y-axis, well, what's going to happen to my y coordinate? My y coordinate is going to stay the same. So when you're reflecting it over the y-axis, your y coordinate stays the same. But if I'm reflecting it over y, x changes. So we're going to get the opposite of 6, which is -6. You're going to go ahead and fill the rest of those in using that information I just explained. For number 8, it says write in your own words what happened to the coordinates in the figure when the following occur. So just go back and listen if you need a little more guidance, but I did tell you what happens to the reflections over the x-axis. So you can make some observations here and write that here. And what happens when you reflect it over the y-axis. And I would say that whatever you write here can also go down here in the summary of today's lesson. Or for the summary of today's lesson, you can refer back to the top, maybe rewrite or restate in your own words some of this information down here. Alright, so make sure you guys do your Edulastic quiz, alright, and check in to Google Classroom and click on the attendance so I know that you went online today and did your work. Alright, everybody have a great day.